Right, so Rishi Sunak has now swanned off to the G7, is he? Fresh from addressing the Council of Europe up in Iceland, schmoozing the European Court of Human Rights president, trying to convince him the prison barge being repaired in Falmouth is a good thing, that deportations to Rwanda are somehow very much in keeping with the Human Rights Convention. Heck, we've got more chance of seeing him slumming it with the rest of us by taking a train across the country, for example, instead of the private jet he's so bloody fond of. But speaking of Sunak's air miles, he's now jetted off across the world to Japan for the latest G7 conference. Perhaps the first question many of the other G7 countries gathered there ought to ask him would be one of, why the hell are you even here? We've heard you're now so poor in the UK, people are apparently stealing baby formula to feed their children. Incidentally, if you ever think you've seen somebody doing that in a shop, you thought wrong. You didn't see anything. And this would be a perfectly valid question to put Sunak, really, wouldn't it? We're apparently the sixth largest economy on the planet. That's what it comes down to, of course. But when that strong economy growth of 0.1%, don't forget, every last bit of it, absolutely storming it, those Brexit benefits, we're positively swimming in them, aren't we? But it's a fair question. If we're so wealthy, so mighty, G7 nation, why is it people cannot even afford the basics here? Wealth redistribution isn't just a socialist lefty notion. It's an obvious necessity now. It's not just baby formula either. It's nappies too, pasta, bread, milk. It's the very basics, the most simple things. It's silly, but food inflation, which I covered in numerous other videos of mine in recent days, so I won't go back into them again in any detail here, means even obvious essential items are too expensive for too many people. A tub of baby formula is now priced at between £9 and £19. That is absolutely bloody staggering and appalling. It's an essential. What are you going to tell the parents to feed their babies instead? Where's Anne Widdecombe when you need her and her sage advice? First there was, if you can't afford the cheese sandwich, don't eat a cheese sandwich. Then came the sequel. If you can't buy the baby formula, don't feed the baby. Public health crisis 101 here. Breastfeed, some will cry. You can't turn a pair of tits on and off like a tap, you know. Not all women can. Not all kids take to it either. Some literally can't. My own children are a prime example of this. My sons were born with something called cleft lip and palate, something they got from me, in case you ever wondered about the shape of my top lip. And you can't form a vacuum with that condition, therefore you can't latch on. Special bottles and a need for formula. So let's not pretend there's an alternative to this. There really isn't. Baby formula inflation is up on average 24%. The cheapest stuff, the inflation on it is up over 40%. Nobody has had a pay rise to match that, let alone parents. New mums who work will be being forced to get back to work as soon as possible when their maternity leave ends, just to make ends meet, or keep trying. The numerous other additional costs that come in as having a child brings, which so many of us parents are more than well aware of. They're calling this a hidden crisis. Well, it needs calling out, and it needs calling out loudly, and Sunak ought to be shamed on the world stage about this, especially when his party is evidently so tin-eared about all of this. And the reason I say that is because I'm reminded of another speech at the recent National Conservatism Conference that was going on earlier this week, or NatC conference. And this was a speech made by former teacher Miriam Cates, bemoaning the low birth rate in this country, which has plummeted over the last 13 years, thanks to Tory misrule making life harder and more expensive for everyone concerned. The population is now broadly flatlining. But Miriam, it's got nothing to do with austerity or a cost of living crisis. It's got nothing to do with ordinary incomes being squeezed while the wealthiest get ever more wealthy. The only reason we still are a G7 country, because all the wealth of the nation is hoarded at the very top. Effectively, two countries in one is what we have here in the UK. One stinking rich and the other not even able to feed their children without thieving. But to Miriam, oh no, it's all the fault of cultural Marxism, which is an anti-Semitic trope. So where's the outcry about Tory anti-Semitism now then? Board of Deputies? They're too concerned over a newspaper cartoon at the moment. The Jewish Labour movement, surely the Labour Party's right-wing Jewish body will have attacked the Tories over anti-Semitism. Well, their national chair wrote a piece for Rupert Murdoch about it behind a paywall, so there's a way to get the message out, isn't it? They didn't even put a tweet out about it. Unless it's rotten lefties, they don't seem phased either. Tumbleweed on the matter. Shame on them. If you want people to start having children again, if the low birth rate bothers you, perhaps instead of telling people for years not to have kids if they can't afford them, very much the Anne Widdecombe line again, you could actually make earning an actual living possible again so that they can. Never mind Sunak going to the G7 telling other nations what they should be doing. There's a lot the other member states should be telling him. It's not something even on the radar to someone like Sunak. He might be genuinely surprised to hear about it, but I doubt it'll happen because the main topic of discussion, as ever at these global summits, is Vladimir Putin. And we already know what Sunak is going there to tell the other member states because he's gone all the way to Japan to basically brag that Russian diamonds will be banned from Britain. Fabulous news. That'll put food in people's bellies for sure. Prat. Diamond bans are one thing, along with metal import bans, all in the name of supporting Ukraine. Nothing indeed to help us. What about cracking down on the Russian donations to your party instead, Rishi? Take a hit yourself. Fixing the so-called London laundromat of Russian money being laundered. And above all else, is Infosys, your wife's father's company that she gets millions of pounds in dividend payouts each year from, how about they finally, after a year or more now since they promised to stop trading in Russia, to close their Moscow office, how about they actually do it now? Because rumour has it, it's all still going. So we know beyond doubt, of course, at that point, that you personally, your family, are not benefiting from the shareholder payouts, some of which will have, at the end of the day, have originated from trading in Putin's Russia. Factually, Sunak has enough to be getting on with here, rather than a vanity trip abroad to hang out with his rich mates from other countries. Hanging out with his rich mates is all Sunak has done his entire life. He needs to address the bits he's not familiar with, the ordinary working class issues where people cannot afford to put food on their plates, cannot afford to feed babies without resorting to theft, yet he could find £250 million for a coronation for a guy worth £1.8 billion who refused to put his own hand in his own pocket, money derived from all manner of sources, not least some which the likes of food banks and poverty charities access, and are now finding it harder and harder to do because Charles literally took away money from food banks in effect. The same sources they're going to are now saying, sorry, we can't help you this time. This country is a sick joke. We didn't get rid of all the clowns when we got rid of Boris Johnson. Sunak might be going there to jeer and boo at Russia with his wealthy chums, but those Infosys rumours and allegations are persistent and won't go away, even to the point one which wasn't even true managed to gain traction in the press and give him a bad day anyway. Until he has definitively squashed Infosys' connections to Putin, and he, of course, doesn't have the clout to do that, it'll still hurt him, it's an issue that shows no sign of going away. But having covered this story in the only way I know how to, after you've liked, shared, and subscribed, of course, so you don't miss the next video, perish the thought that you would. You can watch that video by sticking with this channel and clicking right here, and I'll catch you on the next one. Cheers, folks.